TV. If you're Nebraska, well, first let me back up. Listening this week through the pressers and the media, did you get the sense Nebraska gave Illinois too much, not enough credit, as they mainly talked about what they needed to do for this week?
I mean, I understand from within the team perspective, like from the media perspective, I think we've done a good enough, specifically us, have done a good enough job of like, hey, listen, at the end of the day, like Illinois just had a really good game plan on both sides of the ball, kind of giving the fair credit. But from the team perspective, understand like, you can only control what you can control. You can't control what the other team does out there. And this team, like Rule said, they're starting to judge themselves against their own standard, or that's what they're trying to do. And that's the way the team should operate, but also like at the same time, it's like I don't think from them it's like it makes sense to give credit when it's like the only things they can fix is their own game. They can't go back and change the result of what happened on Friday. All they can do is be like, okay, how do we tweak this so we come out on top the next time around?
Tim, I'm kind of curious about how you've experienced the tenor of the fan base this week, because I think DB and I have had a lot of people to us that seem kind of, I don't know if overly negative, but negative and maybe a little panicky about their outlook on the team following Illinois. But then in some of our listeners on the stream, we're like, hey, I don't know who you guys are listening to. My friends aren't really talking that way. I'm curious from somebody who is sort of in the same business we are, but in a different way. What have you seen the reaction from fans be this week?
It's been weird. Like I kind of understand, like, if you are a not really plugged in and you kind of just listen to the national talk around this team going into the season and through the first 3 weeks, I can understand being like, well, I had national championship expectations for this team and they let me down. But it's weird to see people that are like super engaged with the program that like post on our message board and post to other message boards, being like stunned by this, like, I mean, all of us had Nebraska going 3-1 through the first 4 games for the most part. We had lost to either Colorado or Illinois, and they're still on track. And again, like I understand, like there's a bit of a sky is falling because Friday felt a little familiar just in terms of late game loss. But I also think like a calibration of expectations was kind of needed around here. I do think like Nebraska didn't prove anything through the first 3 weeks. They proved they have a good quarterback and they've got an offensive identity, or like at least a competent offense. But they hadn't really proved anything through the first 3 weeks because we know now in retrospect the quality of opponent they played through those first 3 weeks. I still think there's a lot left to learn about this team, and I still think like, hey, like 8-4 is still very much on the table. Like, again, and if you think about what year 2 of Matt Rule has looked like everywhere else, like it's been fine. And like I think people expecting them to, suddenly go 10-2 and make a playoff run this year was always a little foolish. I think this team could potentially have had or has that ceiling, but a lot would have to go right for that to happen. I just think realistically, like you got to look at this team as like an 8-4 to 7-5-ish level team right now.
Tim, I want to start on offense because I think it was on your board or maybe on social media. CFB networks, they do kind of what they call a spider chart, and obviously it's a little bit of a spray chart for quarterbacks. And Dylan is playing pretty well, but it did kind of show where you would like to see him get a little bit better on later downs. If you're looking and you're not being too picky with the analytics, where is his play for you versus where you thought he needed to be for this year to be successful?
He's done everything I think you really ask for. To me, again, because going into the year, the expectation was that this is going to be a defensive led team. Through 4 weeks, especially the last 2 weeks, they haven't really been that. It's been the offense that's kind of like carried them. I will say with Dylan, I think he's done everything you can ask for from a freshman. If you're looking at one thing that's like, I guess, surprising or something you wanted more from him, I'm a little surprised at the deep touch and the consistency on the deep balls. I just thought that like that was like very much in his bag through high school. And it's like he's still figuring out rhythm with the guys and still figuring out exact touch. Like you could see even on this deep throw, like the 2 that were intercepted specifically, or called interceptions, in high school, he doesn't float that up there. He rifles that into the guy. That comes with time. That comes with familiarity with the receivers. But I don't know. That's been one thing for me that I'm like, okay, like, and throwing outside the numbers too. Like you mentioned that spider chart too. You see the efficiency outside the numbers isn't really there yet, especially deep. I think that'll come in time. I'm not super worried about it, but you're still seeing NFL throws across the middle. You're still seeing like he's doing so much right. But yeah, if you were to nitpick, I think those are the two things that really surprised me.
Now let me flip over to defense, because speaking of nitpicking, right? There are these narratives, right? And then I put it against what I see versus statistically, right? They're 18th in scoring defense. They're 30th in total defense. They're 20th in stop rate. I think if you would have asked me would I have taken those numbers before the season started, I may not have jumped in and said, yeah, but I'd have been like, yeah, that'd be pretty good, right? Like that would be pretty good. But per usual, we don't sometimes like the way it looks. What's fair and what's foul when you look at critiquing this defense?
I think specifically the run defense, I think that's fair at this point just because they weren't really challenged in that department the first 2 weeks, and they've been challenged there the last 2 weeks, and they have not held up. I think that's fair to be like, okay, that feels like a real concern right now. The pass defense, I think, like listening to Tony White talk this week, I thought, like we put out or I don't know, everyone did, but just like, what Tony White said on Tuesday about like his game plan for attacking Illinois. And I had people coming like, oh, this is a lot of nothing and excuses from him. And it's like, no, I mean, he's just laying out the game plan for you and why it didn't work. In the first half, they sat on it to try and stop the run, but then Illinois took that opportunity to try and throw on them. Second half, they were like, okay, let's get after the quarterback a bit. Let's get after the quarterback a bit, and run lanes opened up. This team my takeaway from that is this team isn't disciplined enough just yet to get after the quarterback and maintain run discipline.
So okay, so I was in Nebraska City yesterday. Tim, I am spot on. I am in lockstep with you, and hopefully spot on in my assessment. I agree on pass rushing integrity, like rush lanes. What I felt like Altmaier brought to the table versus what I think some other quarterbacks may, and I also think being a little more on the balls of your feet as opposed to heels will help you with tackling in the run game. Is that fair or foul?
Oh, absolutely fair. Yeah, I mean, even the play, like I would say, even the play, like John Bullock had the forced fumble on, he's on his heels pretty much until that ball is thrown. Then he's chasing that receiver down. Like there was a couple times you're seeing in the back seven where they're just like, they're stuck in there reading a play through, and it's like, commit one way or the other. Like, you know what I mean? Like at least give
that definitely, I'm just telling you, like that will definitely help tackling, right?
Sure.
Like it's just a trust thing. It's playing free versus shoot. What's happening?
Right. Yeah, I just think, and we asked him after the game, and it does feel like that, like still, coming days out, I just feel like Illinois had a really good plan, like attacking them with tempo, attacking them with misdirection. I'll say another thing, if you talk about like what's a concern right now, we saw it pop up in the UTEP game, and then we saw Illinois do it because Illinois had a plan. Tempo can get this defense, like he can really mess with this defense right now. And Illinois, like the way they executed it was, they're used to running it and they ran it with efficiency, while UTEP was just like, all right, we're just running tempo and we're just going to throw whatever at the wall. Illinois, it was dialed in. It was and it was all coordinated to the point that, like, I think other teams are seeing that on film and they're going to try and get Nebraska in those situations where they're on their heels in tempo.
We're talking with Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Tim, is that the downside of playing as many guys as Nebraska tries to, is when somebody goes tempo, it makes it really hard on the defense to try and have the rotations they're used to?
Yeah, but also gives Nebraska that opportunity, because every time the offense, defense, the play has to stop for them. So Nebraska can actually take advantage of that and use that to their advantage to just wind some seconds off the clock and kind of throw that, like get some additional seconds back. With how they manage subs, but no, I do think that's a bit of a downside. But I mean, I kind of agree with Tony White with what he said about I don't think they're subbing enough right now, especially in the back end.
It's interesting when you talk about, and I do think those guys have to play a little bit better too. So, like from a fatigue isn't really the word I'm looking for, but just to stay sharp. Sometimes you need to like get on the pad or be coached up real time. And when you're not getting off the field enough, sometimes it's hard to make those changes on the fly. Tim, going back to offense here for a little bit, especially the way that Nebraska's wanted to recruit at the running back spot and, home run hitters versus not home run hitters. Coach Rule kind of sprinkled this in at the same time. He said, going in, we thought this may be a 20 to 25 carry game for Dowdell. But then in the same paragraph said, we probably need more packages for Emmett. Do you think they're still kind of figuring out that balance of the whole hammer versus nail thing as they try to get out of tendency?
I think so. And I think part of that is just the different styles of backs. I think part of it, and something I've kind of mentioned on our show and a couple other shows, I think when you watch Dante Dowdell run the footballs for the first 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks, I think the big difference is, for the most part, the hole he's always settling for is the hole that's behind Micah Mazzccua and Ben Scott, and that just isn't there right now because Micah Mazzccua is not on the field. And our Steve Merrick actually just reported over at the Insiders Board. He's at the Omaha airport on the flight to Chicago, and they saw Micah Mazzccua on a flight to San Francisco. So Micah Mazzccua will not be with Nebraska this weekend. But on that note, I think just the Dowdell vision question is a real question for me right now. Just like, can he read between the tackles and find that open space? Because there have been holes that he's kind of just missing, and he's running into just straight contact and hoping that his physicality overcomes that. Emmett and Rahmir don't run that way. Specifically, Emmett, I think, has that ability to run between the tackles and run decisively and cut. And so I think I'd want to see more of him. I want to see them split that up a little more, because I think in a world where Nebraska's getting the push they do when Micah's out there, I think Dante's the best back for that just because of how much of a hammer he is. But when you need a guy that can make the most of limited space, that's Emmett Johnson or Rahmir Johnson.
Yeah, Tim, obviously, I think we both agree that vision is part of the issue with Dowdell, but you kind of hit on it there. Part of the issue, I think, too, is like Dowdell needs a hole where some of these other guys just needs a crease, right? You can't, like, if Dowdell can't get skinny in the hole, that's going to be a lot harder for him as those spaces get a little smaller with a little less push on the offensive line.
For sure. That's completely where I see it. And again, like, Emmett and Rahmir can do that. And I think I've liked what I've seen from Rahmir between the tackles as well this year. But yeah, Emmett's been from last year. You saw that a lot with him.
So, Tim, as we kind of shift our focus to Purdue here a little bit, sticking with the running game, though, obviously Devin Mockobee has given Nebraska a ton of trouble in the past, especially a couple years. Where's your level of confidence in Nebraska coming off that Illinois game where the rush defense didn't look great in the second half to try and slow down a guy that they have had trouble with and an offensive line that got some praise from Matt Rule yesterday?
I think, maybe it's just my I don't even know what the word is, but like unseen confidence right now. But I think you're going to see kind of Tony White feels like just the wording he's used this week, the wording Matt Rule's used. I think they're going to get back to like what they did last year defensively and being a little more unpredictable and getting after the quarterback and getting back to fundamentals of the Tony White defense specifically, and just letting guys play like as fast as they want them to. I think you're going to see that a little bit this week, and I think Nebraska had a plan last year for Purdue, and I think they're going to have another plan this year because I don't see too many differences from this Purdue team from last year. And so I think you can go back to the plan you had last year, accounting for like, okay, hey, we don't have Omar Brown, we don't have Quentin Newsome, but we do have, a pretty solid unit up front, and we trust the guys we have in the back end to hold up.
How do you look at, excuse me, but kind of the Hudson Card versus Altmaier in terms of just their style? I get Purdue is a little thin outside the numbers and pretty beat up, especially after that Notre Dame game. But when you look at the style of quarterback that you think can present some trouble for Nebraska, do you see any similarities?
Yeah, a quarterback that could. You're going to see these next couple of weeks, and then obviously I don't think you're really going to see it against Indiana. I think their quarterback's talented, but I don't think he's this type of guy. But a quarterback that can kind of move the pocket around and extend plays and do that kind of thing, or basically just be a dual threat quarterback. I think that really challenges Nebraska right now because they don't have a clear answer for it, which I think is really interesting because of who they practice against. You would think practicing against Dylan would help you prep for that, but they showed the last 2 weeks, hey, a quarterback that's mobile. We saw that pop up against Northern Iowa as well. A quarterback that can move around a little bit, that can extend plays. The defense can't really hold downfield all that well. And, I think relatively though, Damon, you mentioned those stats, but I think relatively, there's obviously been some real issues with this defense specifically against the run, but I think against the pass,
it's on early downs.
Yep.
I've got a lot of first down defense for them is that's where they've got to get better, and it will eventually help them on third down.
For sure.
Tim, you brought up an interesting point about practicing against Dylan and maybe that translating, but Dylan, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I would compare Dylan more to Shedeur in a guy that extends to throw, whereas the guys they've had trouble with are guys that are a little bit more willing to take off. Is that a fair distinction to make?
Yeah, I think absolutely. But I think Dylan, more than Shedeur, has a really, really natural feel for extending plays. Whereas, Shedeur's more statuesque. Dylan does move that pocket around and do some of those things. And I think that's more so what Nebraska is struggling with right now than a guy that truly, because I think they're doing a good job of triggering on the quarterback once he starts to take off. I just think they don't do a good enough job of holding up in coverage when it's okay, he's rolling out to the right. We gotta shift our coverage over as well.
How much of that is, especially last week, how much of that do you think is sort of the ripple effect of Tommy Hill not being out there for a good chunk of that? Obviously, Sierra Wright played pretty well, but if Tommy Hill is who we kind of think he is, an NFL draft pick, that type of thing, there has to be some repercussions from him not being in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, even I think Tommy's gotten to the point when he's fully healthy, and he wasn't that at the start of the game. Matt Rule said that at the this week, and you kind of saw that obviously on film, just the how off he looked on that first drive before they took him out. He's healthy. He is that level right now where I think he's a bit of a field eliminator. He's completely eliminated the side of the field he's on. Quarterbacks don't really look there or target that way, and or they rarely do, you know what I mean? That's not their first read or that's not their first look is to go just go at Tommy. And so I think because of that, I think that was missed a little bit last week just because that does kind of completely eliminate a side of a field for you.
When you're taking a look at Nebraska's approach this week as it relates to being on the road, do you like how are you trying to decipher between tight and uptight versus kind of dialed in and focused?
Yeah, I don't think you want to be too and I don't think they're too tight necessarily. I think it is more dialed in and focused. I think my general feel I think the fan base has wavered over the last 2 weeks just in terms of the confidence in the team and expectations and all of that. But I think the team in general, I still do believe, I think last week rattled them a good bit, but I think it gave them they utilize that as an edge. You hear the way MJ Sherman talks, you hear the way the rest of the team talks this last week. I think it hasn't affected the team as much as it has the fan base.
Yeah, I mean, certainly MJ Sherman seemed like he was pretty locked in this week.
And that's the thing. I think with this team right now is so many of these veteran senior leaders are also guys that are contributing at a high level for this team, that I think it's just that's just going to carry over on the field. You have the mix of these old veterans that know what the standard is now and are trying to play to that, to hold everyone else accountable to that. And then you have a freshman quarterback that's trying to get everybody up to his standard as well. And so I think that the combination of those two things bodes well down the line. Again, we have to see what this team does on Saturday, but I think we learn a lot about this team on Saturday. If they can hold their own, if they can kind of come out against some adversity, dealing with the rain, dealing with this first road game, dealing with having to bring your own juice a little bit on the road. If they can get through all of that, I think you answer a lot of questions going into a tough stretch of the schedule.
Tim, real quick, we have spent all week talking about Illinois and Purdue. I don't think we've even barely mentioned the Dayton Raiola commitment yet to Nebraska.
Good point.
And so
all week, maybe.
I know. So I wanted to bring it up with you because I know you've been pretty dialed in on what his kind of recruitment looked like. what led to this? Because I know there was, I mean, at least I've heard from other recruiting people, and I think from you as well, that Nebraska wanted to see some varsity tape before accepting that commitment.
Yeah, and I think the start of the year he's had there's been enough on film so far that it's like, okay, I think you can
He
give him the
actually looks
green
pretty
light. But I
good.
think part of it too is also on his end, just that growing confidence, and like, I think he put it out there too, is like, I just wanted to be there. And it's like I like I every time I'm out there, it's just, it feels like that this is where I want to be and where I need to be. And I think that I think just all of that just like compiled in itself. And I think part of it too, I don't know how intentional in it or not is either, but like a bit strategic on just like, hey, like Dylan's not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. Like the Raiola family's kind of locked in.
That's Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Tim, we appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, TV.